The tooling can be simple. The tooling should be simple. It's really the human and social coordination around the tooling that is the hard part. I think generally Cosmos, I feel like, has the most active governance process out of any of the networks that we support.
Welcome to the Bare Metal Podcast.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Bare Metal Podcast. As is customary these last few episodes, I'd like to invite everybody to the Gateway Conference held in Prague between June 3rd and 5th. It's during Prague Blockchain Week, when there are a lot of other interesting conferences around, for example, Ethereum or Bitcoin. So please come and have a look. Today I've got with me Chris Remus from Chainflow. Hi, Chris.
Hi, Martin. Thanks for having me.
So can you start off by introducing Chainflow, where you guys came from, what's the philosophy behind the validator?
Sure. Chainflow has been around since, I guess, unofficially about 2016. And since then, I've been fortunate to bootstrap Chainflow to where we are today. And we're validating on about 15 different mainnets with a very small team. We've taken no outside investment. We've stayed independent throughout, which is, I feel like, one of our differentiators. And really what we're hoping to do is we're hoping to build out infrastructure that ultimately enables an alternative to the current economy. We feel the current economy is very inequitable and unfair and imbalanced, and we're hoping that through the infrastructure we build, we're able to put in place the foundation for an alternative economy that becomes much more fair, much more equitable, and much more accessible to a much wider segment of humanity than we have today. And that's what drives us.
Very admirable vision, at least from my perspective. You mentioned you guys obviously to realize that you need to be serious about staying independent and holding true to your values, which brings with it some limitations, right? No outside money, no outside influence. So what do you think that's going to cost you? What are the difficulties that smaller independent validators face?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, we started actually before some of the names you probably recognize now as the biggest names in staking. We started either at the same time or before, and we've taken a very different approach. And as a result, we've seen these other companies get huge. Some of them even have the billion-dollar unicorn valuations. But for us, that's not what we're after. We really feel like I guess I'll just say it this way, if the usual Silicon Valley high growth, growth at all cost business model is pursued in the crypto space, it's somewhat orthogonal to the values of the crypto space, because in order to grow, you have to capture market share. And as you continue to capture market share, you sooner or later become a vector for centralization. So we really feel like, the high growth business model, growth at all cost strategy really goes at odds with what we're really trying to do in the crypto space when it comes to building a decentralized future. So particular to us, because it was just me for such a long time, I really focused on running the validators well, and keeping our systems available and secure. At what cost? Basically, what we're finding right now is that typically our advantage had been, I was fortunate to get into these networks early, and as a result, establish myself in Chainflow early, launch at Genesis, attract stake through that early involvement. But what we're seeing now, as some of these networks are running 2 and 3 years in, that advantage fades over time. So what we're currently looking to do is we're currently figuring out how to, build out a sustainable presence on these networks. And one of the areas that we struggle with right now is being seen on these networks, because we don't have the resources of the larger validators and large validator companies, particularly around marketing and business development. And while we feel like we're, doing really good work, and we're really trying to lead with our values first, we feel like a lot of the time, that doesn't necessarily get seen because we're living in such a noisy world right now. So that can be frustrating at times, but, we feel like we're doing this for the right reasons. We're doing good work. And, we feel like ultimately, as we've been able to establish ourselves, we'll be able to change that course for us too.
So what do you think would move the needle here? Are you guys leaning more toward, let's build up a stronger social presence. Let's talk more to delegators. Let's engage them more. Or are you thinking of, doing some high profile public contributions that would get you visibility, or even using some affiliations to get yourself seen. What's where is your mind at?
Yeah, I think what we're trying to do, we're trying to really focus on what value we can contribute to the networks we support. And what that also means is that while we support about 15 networks today, we're really going to focus in on probably a smaller number of networks moving forward, so we can provide more focused attention on the networks we really, really believe in at this point. And as an aside, we have come down on a couple of networks over the years, and we'll probably come down on, networks moving forward into the future. But we can talk about that when we talk about, how we decide on which networks to support. But more directly to your question, we're trying to figure out where we can continue to add value and make contributions to these networks where we support. So, for example, on Solana, we started leading the community-led validator calls, which supplement the Solana-led validator calls. So that's one way we're trying to jump in and be more helpful in Solana. But ultimately, we're trying to figure out how we can make really valuable contributions to the communities we support. And then also lead with our, decentralized first values. And then hopefully, through a stronger social presence and, having some more resources to get the word out about what we're doing, connect to the people who connect with our values and with whom our values resonate, and then, hopefully receive their stake and delegation in support of the contributions we're making.
So you mentioned an interesting thing where you're going to be winding down on a few networks. This does sort of touch on this very key activity of validators, which is evaluating and think about either current or new projects and continuously thinking, do I want to be validating this network? I mean, I've said on this podcast several times, it is our position that when a validator validates a blockchain, they're also lending them their own reputation. They are validating the project. They're stamping it and saying, okay, we're validating here. We think this makes sense. So I'd really like to get a read on what you guys are looking for in projects that you want to validate. Do you have some sort of checklist? Do you guys, have a forum for internal discussion? How do you guys make these decisions?
Yeah, even from the very beginning, well, I should say way back at the very beginning, back in like 2017, there weren't a whole lot of networks launching. So back then it was Cosmos launched, another network launched, and, it was just, and nobody knew, which networks were really going to work, which weren't going to work. So I think a lot of us who started early took sort of a spray and pray approach. We just started to go broad because we just weren't sure which networks, were going to pan out. But over time, we've seen which networks have started to really follow through and which networks haven't. And for us, it really starts with the values that we feel like that network is trying to build itself upon. So, decentralization means a lot of things to a lot of different people, but to us, we look, are these teams building something because they believe in the prospect of decentralization? Do they truly believe in the power of a decentralized future? And are they willing to make the sacrifices to support that future along the way? So the first thing we look at is whether or not these networks are really, consistent with our decentralized values. Second step is whether or not they have the team that is, committed to living these decentralized values as well. And often what that means is, centralization is easy, decentralization is hard. And at the beginning, of course, there has to be some degree of centralized coordination, but over time, there also has to be a willingness to let go of that convenience and let things get a little messy along the way too, in order for the project to, I guess I would call it, progressively decentralize. So, our first filter is whether or not we, think the team is coming from a decentralized first perspective. Another filter, once we start working with the project, if they pass the first filter, is whether or not they're actually taking steps toward decentralizing. And then, of course, I guess, in between, it's whether or not the technology is interesting. Is there a competitive advantage of this network over that network? Or are there use cases that one network can support that, an existing network can't? And then finally, you know, the network ultimately has to be profitable for us too, especially for us because we are self-funded. We are able to cross subsidize or our work on one network with proceeds from another. But ultimately, the network does have to be profitable for us in order to support it in the long term.
Right. So to summarize what I hear, first is a values and ethics evaluation, and the second one is then a success success estimation. This is based on like is this something that is going to get traction, and therefore economic activity which can then sustain validators, which absolutely makes sense. If we dig into this values and ethics first, you mentioned one of the key ones, decentralization. Is this team do they have a decentralization mindset which they bring to this project? Now, when you're evaluating this, are you thinking about the nature of the project? Like, are these guys issuing, is this a chain to issue USDC, or is it a chain to, do whatever else? Or is this more a mindset of you look at the roadmap and you look at how are these guys distributing tokens in Genesis? What's going to happen to these tokens? Do they have a roadmap toward decentralization? Are you considering both of these, or is it more like you put your weight on like the nature of the project, and then you're willing to put more faith in gradual decentralization? How does that work?
Yeah, I think what we look for, I often say we look for networks that are walking the walk and not just talking the talk. And then I heard an interesting anecdote the other day from a tweet by Chris Berniski that sounds like he pulled it from somewhere else, but it's the acronym DINO, decentralized in name only. So, I mean, that kind of goes by the same thing, There's so many projects out there, whether they're networks or validator companies supporting these networks, may say that they're supporting decentralization, but their actions seem to be actually going, in the opposite direction. So really, I guess, having done this for a number of years, you get a feel for the people who are coming at this because they believe in, building a better future on a censorship resistant, decentralized network, or the people who are in this because they think it's, the next big thing and are trying to capitalize on a financial opportunity. And I think, it's not a binary 0 or 1 answer, but I think you kind of intuitively you can feel out the difference between the people. So I think it's really based on the teams, and then the teams and the initial token distribution also says a lot. If a team is being spun out of, one of the big tech companies to build out a blockchain that tech company started building but then stopped, and has a big investment from the tech company and has a big token distribution that's majority controlled by insiders, then chances are that project's going to have a harder time decentralizing than a project that's community based and keeps enough for the team to keep the team going, but then distributes that allocation to community members for different reasons. So I think the initial token distribution is usually a pretty good barometer of whether or not the project's going to walk the walk and not just talk the talk.
So what it sounds like is you put a lot of weight on actually talking to the team and getting a read. From what you're saying, it seems they're trying to get a read on their mindset, like see how they're communicating, see what they think is important. Did you guys like go and talk to the team members, or do you place emphasis on reading written materials, Medium posts, white papers, and whatnot?
Yeah, a lot of it comes from talking to the team and talking to the team early. And the way it's going these days, when I started, it was a lot easier to just like show up and enter a permissionless validator set. But today it's getting harder and harder to do that because there's a lot of gates that these teams control. So while that's unfortunate for some perspective, from a positive perspective, it gives you a chance to talk to the team and different team members along the way. So by the time the testnet launches, we've usually had at least a few conversations with some key team members that start to paint the picture for us as to whether or not we feel values aligned with the people and what they're building.
Key for decentralization is obviously governance. I think so this podcast is generally focused around Cosmos, which has a super active, let's say, governance and community and discussion. I'd like to get your read on what you think about the Cosmos governance inside the Cosmos ecosystem vis-a-vis other ecosystems, and whether you consider the current state somehow healthy, or do you feel there's too much DPS, too much drama per second? What is your read?
I think generally Cosmos, I feel like, has the most active governance process out of any of the networks that we support. I feel like it's one of the few networks, at least again, that we support, that has an on-chain governance process. I think Cosmos has done well building that on-chain governance process in from the beginning. And it's not necessarily complex, but it actually doesn't have to be complex either. Before I started Chainflow, I was doing some work with a project that was building DAO tools on Ethereum. And what that taught me is that the tooling can be simple, and the tooling should be simple. It's really the human and social coordination around the tooling that is the hard part. So by the time you're getting to a point where you're voting yes, no, or no with veto, or abstain for that matter, there's a whole lot of stuff that goes on. And humans are messy, and computers are neat. So computers make 0 and 1 decisions, humans don't. So I think a lot of what we see is actually healthy, messy human debate around a lot of the proposals that are happening primarily on the hub, and then also on some of the other chains too. But I think healthy debate is a sign of a healthy governance system, because if all you're doing out there is everybody's voting yes on a proposal and there's no debate, everybody's just saying to the moon, to the moon, to the moon, that's not really helping anybody. So I think a lot of the debate that's happening in the Cosmos community is healthy for the most part. Of course, at some point it turns unhealthy as well. But generally, I'm hopeful that over time, those people with good intention are going to continue to speak up, because I think it's really important for those with good intention to speak up, even if they may not hold the most tokens. And hopefully over time the community will continue to grow and thrive because of healthy debate, and bad actors are called out and not necessarily supported in ways that will give them additional power in the community.
So do you feel that Cosmos governance has evolved significantly over time and since the beginning? Have there been changes in the nature of the discussions, or the types of the proposals, or the frequency? Do you see that the Cosmos ecosystem has evolved?
Yeah, I mean, I think the ability to vote for on-chain parameters has evolved. I mean, I think from a purely technical perspective, I think that's pretty great, that you're going to vote for on-chain parameters, and those on-chain parameters will be adhered to if the vote passes. I think we're also seeing proposals out there that are not on-chain, but more signaling proposals, and then also getting into even ethics and the more human and social coordination side of things. So I've really seen the way people are using the proposals has gotten very creative. Of course, being able to vote yes, no, no with veto, and abstain, those are 4 pretty good options. But at times it can be hard to vote in that way on a proposal if a proposal contains a lot of different decisions. But I think it is interesting to watch the community push the limits and the realm of what's possible within this proposal structure. And as a result, it's inspired a lot of debate, not just on a simple technical question, but also on questions of ethics and more general social coordination.
Right. Sometimes it feels like in the, just reading the proposals by myself, I feel confused as to what's going to happen if I voted with, if I entered my vote with different options. Like, what's the difference between a no and no with veto? Like, sometimes people even try to redefine this inside the proposal, right? Which also, if you vote no with veto, that means it's. So in some sense, it feels like proposals have got more elaborate. People are trying to, like, in some sense, like, get smart with how to formulate these proposals, which definitely I find confusing. And I don't know if it's aiding the original mission of clear community-based decision-making and devolution.
I think for me, one of the areas that the process could be improved is if the scope of these proposals was reduced. Because I often, for example, we'll vote to abstain from a proposal if, for example, of let's say 3 decisions are required within a proposal. We may choose to abstain because we may, vote yes for one, no for another, and yes for another. But it's really difficult.
Right.
You can't convey that with the way these proposals are written. So I think one area of improvement would be if the scope of these proposals was narrowed so that you got to as close as making a single decision to a single proposal as possible.
Yeah, that makes sense. It is sometimes starting to look like a parliament game, right, where you're trying to attach like different proposals to a proposed law to pass these things you want to slip. Right. So we don't want to get there.
Yeah.
The other topic that's on my mind here is decentralization. If you want to have real governance, you should really have a set of sovereign actors that are, enacting their will according to their set of values, and this all somehow needs to mesh together, right? So, my question would be: do you consider stake decentralized today? You can talk about the hub, or you can pick another chain if you want. But do you feel the situation is good today, or is it on a good? Is it moving in a good direction?
We have this website that we track the Nakamoto coefficient for proof of stake networks called nakaflow.io. And if you look at the hub is usually around 6 to 8. So essentially what that means is 6 to 8 validators control a third of the network stake. And to me, this is one area that I think not enough people within Cosmos are really paying attention to. And that, the strength of the Cosmos community could really improve that. Because if you look at that 6 to 8 in the context of other networks out there, it tends to be on the lower side of things. So to me, that says that stake is pretty concentrated within Cosmos, within the hub. And we're actually expanding that out to other networks too. But from the networks we're tracking, I think Regen is about 10. Quicksilver might be around 10 as well now. But most of the Cosmos-based networks are hovering around 6 to 8, if I'm remembering correctly. And I think we could do a lot better. I think, the perfect set would be, an evenly distributed stake distribution among, the active set of whatever it is, 100, 125, 150, 175 validators. I doubt we would ever get there, or if we did, it would be a really long time and we need to do some different things. But, I think we can do better than 6 or 8 also. So I do think that there's a lot of room for improvement there.
What do you think we can do? What should be done to help stake decentralize? What are the activities that we need to enact? What are the efforts that we need to exert?
I think it starts with education. When I think about change in general, I think the first thing you need to do is be aware of something. So, for example, we need to be aware that the Nakamoto coefficient is 6 to 8. And then we need to recognize that as something that could be improved as step 2. And then step 3 is what you just asked me, which was, well, then how do we improve it? But I really think right now we're at the awareness building stage, because I think if you asked many people in the Cosmos community, they wouldn't know. They wouldn't necessarily understand the implications of that. And until you understand the implications of it, you may not really have any motivation to change it. And then to actually change it, I think we need to educate people on a lot of different things. But, one of the things we need to talk about is custodial versus non-custodial staking, for example. Does, not your keys, not your coins really matter to you or not? Because if it does matter to you, then you probably wouldn't sacrifice, essentially custody of your tokens to a centralized exchange in return for the convenience that they offer through their staking products. And also, I looked at one of the big exchanges recently, and their fee is pretty high. Like, it's probably 5 to 6 times as high as most of the non-custodial staking providers out there charge. You don't necessarily see that if you look at MintScan, for example. But if you go into the T's and C's, the terms and conditions of these platforms, you'll see that the fees are really high. So I think first of all,
30% in some cases. Yeah.
yeah,
It's very, very
exactly, exactly. So I think first of all, we need to make people aware of what happens when they avail themselves of the convenience of staking to a centralized exchange, and the implications of that. And then after that, I mean, it sounds small, but it's something I've been saying for a really long time. I really think the worst way to organize a block explorer is to default weight or default sort by descending stake weight. So I really think the worst thing to do is basically put the highest stake validators at the top, because essentially what happens is that delegators then look at the top of the list. They maybe look at the 3 to 5 top staked validators. They see who has the lowest fee, and they just pile their stake into the top 3 to 5 validators.
Right.
So I think something very simple that I think the Big Dipper by Forble does or used to do is organize that list alphabetically, if nothing else. So I think there are bigger things that we can do, such as education, and then there are also smaller tactical things that we can do, like block explorer organization. And then in the middle, I really think, and I'm coming around to the point that, or the conclusion that we need some carrots and sticks within the protocol itself. Because I think, waiting for human nature to do this, until enough pain is felt, people aren't really going to do this on their own. So I really think we're at a point where we need some carrots and sticks to get in there to really help better distribute stake than we have it today. And that can be penalties for staking to a higher staked validator, or incentives to stake to a lower staked validator, or some combination of the two. But I really think it's time to start building some of these things into the protocol itself.
Those are interesting things. I'd like to get to that. But before we do, I feel very strongly about the construction of block explorers, and about actually asking delegators to make a choice. Like if you really think about it and put yourself into the mind of somebody who's just gotten his tokens off a centralized exchange, and let's say they managed to install Kepler and they've got their tokens in their Kepler. Right? Now, when they press stake, they're presented. If it's a medium-sized network, there's 100 choices. Right? There's 100 validators in there. And you're like scrolling through the list going, and you see, if you really think about it, if you don't know these validators, if you look at it, it's a huge list. It's got names and numbers next to it. That's it, right? And you're supposed to, maybe they're linked. Sometimes you get website links, right? And you're scrolling through this list trying to understand this. And I think what you're saying about the ordering makes a lot of sense, because it just prevents the default reaction of the person. Oh, these guys, are on top. I'm just going to stake with one of them. But I feel there's a problem here that doesn't go away with reordering, and that is, how do I trust the small guys? Right? Because all these, if I was looking through this list and was ordered randomly, I'd see these guys with a lot of stake. Immediately, my mind would still think, okay, this guy is trusted. That's just the default reasoning I'd make, right? So, should I put my my tokens here where lots of other people have put their tokens, or should I bet on this? These smaller validators, which are exactly the independent validators that, if we're serious about decentralizing the network, we need to support these guys. Right? So, do you see a way around, or a way to help this this tendency to support people to move their tokens to these validators, which just appear optically smaller in this list?
Yeah, I mean, I think again it comes back to education. The first question to answer is why should you support smaller independent validators? And to me, one of the analogies that I'm starting to think of is when you think of central banks around the world. How many central banks are there in the world, or how many banks control the world financial system? And if we're in this to establish an alternative to that system, I think we want to have more entities, or in our case, we want to have more validators with more control of the network than the traditional financial system has banks in control of the banking network. So let's say 6 banks could do whatever they want and control the financial system that we have today. We definitely want more than 6 validators to do the same thing, because what good are we doing if we're just trading one set of power holders, if you will, for another set of power holders. I think human nature has shown that even the most, well-intentioned of people, when they get big enough and powerful enough, may make decisions that tend to benefit them and not the common good. So I think the first thing we need to think of is, why are you here? What are you here to support? And then if you're here to support a more fair and equitable future, you need a better distribution of power so that we don't replicate the abuses of power we have today. And then if you do that, you're going to see that it's not the 6 or 10 validators that have all the stake. It's going to be, a bigger number. And this brings me to your point. But once you get to these other validators, you have no idea who to trust, because, even the validator names can sound, silly or a little crazy too when you look at them, and confusing. So I do think there needs to be some type of reputation system built. And, I've talked to a few different people about this over the years. And I think you probably even had some guests that, have maybe started to explore this too. And you may be exploring it with your own efforts. But yeah, I really think we need some type of enhanced dashboard that people can go to and really make informed decisions as to which validators to choose and why. And being able to do that, I think starting on a single network, but then expanding that out over different networks is really the way to go. So if you had a good dashboard that showed, the Cosmos Hub validators, and it showed more than, their uptime, which, as Zaki said for a long time, is somewhat a vanity metric, because pretty much everybody has 100% uptime, if not, 99 to 100%. And that's really all it shows. Not a lot more than that, and their voting history, which has been helpful. But I think you need more, just to your point, help people figure out which of these smaller independent validators can be trusted and why.
I think that I would agree. More visibility into key areas around blockchains. So we think RockOX, we think a lot about infrastructure, and we're continuously sort of enhancing our viewpoint of what constitutes a healthy blockchain from various perspectives. So now the current evolution, which is also going to match the next version of the Observatory that we're building, is centered around 4 ideas. So there's performance, meaning block signing. Are blocks getting signed quickly? How many blocks do you have where the user has to wait 15 seconds because there are multiple rounds, which is decreasing the UX, which may be a more interesting perspective than signing percentage from various validators. Is your blockchain actually syncing nicely? Is it consistent? Governance: are your validators engaged? Do they vote? What do the last 5 proposals look like? Then what's value extraction? What's the average commission? How many tokens are leaving each month to fund the security of the blockchain? Do you feel there's a good balance? Does the public infrastructure look like? Are there working RPCs? Means can developers actually develop dApps? Because if you don't have working RPCs, there are no dApps coming to this chain because the chain basically is Alzheimer's, right? Sometimes reports of transaction happen, then it doesn't. RPCs are down, so you can't see anybody's stakes and delegations. Do you have IBC connections to other chains? Like I said, there's all these things you can think about, and we sort of think of these 4 tiles: public infrastructure, or developer-facing infrastructure, user infrastructure, value extraction, performance, and governance. So there's a lot of I think it would be great if other people had other ideas, and so we could have multiple systems that people can look into. And we're certainly hoping more such dashboards will be motivated and developed. But back to the independent validators. One last thing I'd like to touch on is you guys have founded the Staking Defense League, which is a body that tries to sort of accumulate or combine the strength of individual validators to help decentralized network. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. And before I do, I think one other thing that's important to highlight are the validator contributions. So the RPC nodes are one type of contribution, but I think I would call it maybe some of the softer contributions I think are really interesting to highlight too, and maybe they are self-reported and then validated by others who've experienced the validators making certain contributions. But I do think there's another important element that can be a differentiator, which is the softer contributions. Are they
Right.
contributing to governance, like you said? Are they? There's a lot of other things they can do.
Writing
Are they
code,
developing
reviewing.
content, education materials, writing code? Because I think what you've seen so far is that the validators who do write code tend to get a lot of attention for good reason. But for example, we don't write code, but we feel like we do some other things that can be valuable. And it would be really valuable and helpful for us to have somewhere to showcase that too. But now to your point, yeah, the Staking Defense League is something. I actually started it right after the Cosmos Hub went live, and it was started in response to a fear that I had about stake centralizing pretty fast. I brought up some of these concerns during the earliest Cosmos testnets, and basically, the response then was, well, this is how we have to do it because there's no other way, or don't worry, people are going to be altruistic when the network goes live, and no one will accumulate too much stake. And then when the network went live and stake accumulated, I think the Nakamoto coefficient at launch was about 3. People were surprised, and I was on the side saying to myself, well, yeah, it's not very surprising because of some of the mechanisms of proof of stake in general. But to your point, so I started this thing called the Staking Defense League, and at the time it was a simple discourse forum where I was hoping we could attract some of the smaller independent validators and give each other some visibility. It didn't really go anywhere because I had no resources to put to it, but about a year and a half ago, a friend of mine, Kevin from Throwback Labs, was asked me, he's like, what's going on with that? And I told him, and he's like, hey, I could help out there. So yeah, what it's become is an organization, a loose organization that essentially tries to help other smaller independent validators not just survive, but also thrive. And I guess I should say too, it's really open to everyone, but we think, it's probably most attractive to the smaller independent validators because we're trying to level the playing field, especially when it comes to resources, because, we just can't compete with the big validator companies when it comes to, let's say, marketing and biz dev, for example. So it's an organization right now that probably has about 15 or 20 loose members, probably about 5 or 6 very active members, and we're trying to figure it out. We're trying to figure out how to build out some revenue generating projects to support the ongoing work, and it's been a nice resource too to have a sounding board for people who are experiencing some of the same challenges that we've experienced as an independent validator for all these years. And we help each other discover new networks to come online to get into those new networks. We help each other with technical problems that may seem too new and dumb for the main Discord channels, but we can ask each other within our own safe community, and help each other what's the word I'm looking for, kind of narrow the gap in knowledge in a safe way. And yeah, we're enjoying it, and ultimately we're hoping it's going to bring visibility to other independent validators and give them maybe that little bit of boost they need, because there are a lot of them operating out there by themselves, and it can be a lonely place. So we just hope that this can be a platform that raises all of us up and helps us all continue to operate on these networks, because we truly believe that without smaller independent operators, these validator sets won't be too healthy. And then finally, we also have a commitment, for example, that if any of us were ever to get into the Nakamoto coefficient of the network, we'll then start to redelegate a portion of our rewards to other validators. So we're also trying to take very active steps to support decentralization of stake. And on that note, if a bigger validator company wanted to join us and they were able to make that commitment as well, they'd be welcomed with open arms, because we think that would be a great step forward for a lot of these networks.
So if somebody wanted to check out the Staking Defense League or even join, where could they find you guys?
Yeah, stakingdefense.org is the website.
Stakingdefense.org. Right.
Yeah, there's a Twitter, a very unused Twitter handle at Staking Defense on Twitter. But stakingdefense.org points you to the Discord channel or the Discord server, and then once you're in the Discord server, you're off and running.
Right. Well, that sounds like a good note to end this podcast. So hopefully you'll get some new members.
Yeah, thanks.
Well, thanks very much for coming in, Chris. It was great to chat.
thanks for having us, and thanks for thinking of us.